The importance of brakes is somewhat subjective. Consider the fact that if your vehicle's broken down out in a flat, marshy field and bogged, then brakes are not going to be a high priority. However, if your vehicle has the power to roll, either under its own steam, somebody else's, or the effects of gravity, brakes become very important. We have here the original brake master cylinder, which are quite pricey items to replace, and I was hoping to renovate this, put it back on the vehicle. However, as we look inside that barrel, it feels quite pitted and rough, so I think it disqualifies it from any further use, and it's going to have to be retired. The plunger that lives in there likewise, there's a bit of corrosion on it, sharp edges and pitting. So there you go, done. What we do have in the spare parts section of the boxes we received is a brand new brake master cylinder. Now it differs in a couple of ways to the original. The first is it only has 2 holes, but we compensated for that when we installed the new outrigger back in one of those other early episodes. The other is this rod that's somewhat thinner than the original, quite different indeed. So how are we going to solve that? Voila, a brand new one. Let's install it. Before we put this in, we'll just get some of that brake fluid over our nice new paint job. Because I drilled a few extra holes to accommodate the different configurations of brake master cylinder, I constructed this thing here, like a backing plate that's going to live inside the outrigger. So hopefully to add in some of the structural integrity I may have taken away with the extra holes. Now we're not finalising the brakes by any means, we're finalising the plumbing, the pipes. Now from the reservoir to the master cylinder is a 17-inch long pipe that only just makes it. You've got to be really exact about that. So I went down the local auto parts shop and I got my own, and I cut the English ones off one of these, popped them onto this, flared them myself with a cheap kit, so we'll see how that runs, and then bent it to shape. So we're going to pop it in. Well, I think this thing screws in under here. It must be what the pedal connects to. But, this can all be adjusted after the fact. We'll just get it in there now. There we go. Beauty. Well, while we're working down in this area, we'll have a quick look at this little hole here. It's got 2 half bushes in it, one on either side, and I haven't touched them. They look fine. But that's where this device lives, and this thing here operates your clutch. So that goes into that hole. And there we go. So the pedal will connect here, and on the other side will be a shaft that'll go into your bell housing. All right. Living in this hole here is what I would call a spindle. It's what the brake and the clutch pivot on. You can see here the bush of what's going into a clutch pedal. It rotates very smoothly. That's without lubrication. Anyway, it slots in like that. I'm not certain if it's meant to be a press fit or it's meant to just slot in so easily. All I know is that the original was not so obliging on its way out. I had to cut it, and you can see the savagery and violence that went into removal of this section right there. Nasty stuff. One of the tricks I used to try and get it out that failed was putting a block of wood with a jack, and the chassis rails began to bend outwards. That was not good. So eventually it was all drills and hacksaws and a lot of time, a lot of effort. When we cut a little bit of that metal out though, and we lost some here, I figure that this washer basically was the right thickness to use. So that's been modified into a shim. We're going to slot that over the back like that. Pop it in there. And that should bring it out at just where it was originally. The next items we're going to install before we move on to other things are these, which is part of the handbrake system, somewhere between the handle and what lives on the back of the transmission here, and it bolts on to the chassis. This is brand new. We've got a nice smooth shiny shaft there, and this one is old, but what we have inside is a brand new plastic bush. So I'm wondering if, because I've got a plastic bush there, and because this is exposed to dirt and dust, it might be fine just running dry. However, I don't think I can help myself. Just a little bit of grease. Just a little bit. Now the reason we had to replace this one, if we have a close look at the old, you can see how pitted and rough it is and even stepped. So when this guy was sitting on there, it would wobble, and that's not good, so we're retiring that one. On we go with this, like such, and we have a washer, and then we have a circlip. All right, stick it on. Have our partially restored fuel tank here. It's not finished yet. It was pretty grotty when we started. Now, from when we began to where we are now, it was a long and arduous task. It was one of those mundane jobs that carry on without the cameras rolling. So to go back and see what we've done, looks like we're going to have to endure another dreadful trip in the Turdus. films, past, present and future, she knows about this time travel and malarkey, so well, you guys go and listen to what he's got to say. I might just hang out here for a bit. Something needed to be sorted out sooner rather than later is going to be the fuel tank. Alright, a lot of grime, grunge and shit, and also a little bit of rust as well, so I'm hoping that's not too bad, but considering some of the things we're finding, it probably is. I don't want to lose that. Whew. Rather vile stench. Oh, got it. So this is the float that we're going to try and remove here. Ooh. I'm actually not sure this works anymore. It looks pretty corroded and nasty. Alright. Alright, that was quite an impressive attempt at a first clean. Alright, for anyone who dares, pop your head in here and have a little look. Now you can see that there's filth and grime still up on the top of the tank here where I can't reach, so I haven't worked out a plan yet how to get that out. So this is where we are with the fuel tank right now. You can see after some effort, oh, it's come up kind of shiny-ish. A lot better than what it was, if you can recall. Once we get the cap off that sender, we can scrape it as best we can and clean it up before giving it a therapeutic wash in WD-40. I think we've seen enough here. I think we've covered it. We can jump in our machine and head back to the present.
Preparing primary chamber for evacuation.
Stinks in here more than normal. Seriously? I mean, honestly, who did that? Alright, the fuel tank's not perfect, but there's a lot more better. Alright, now before we install it, there is two things we have to attend to. The first is, you can see the sender unit is working fine and fluid, but we do have to check the electrical connectors inside. We'll have to hook it up to a battery and a gauge to make sure they're all working good. The other thing is the fuel pickup tube. Way back in the early days, there was a little mesh thingamajig on the end there that stopped shit from getting sucked up from the bottom. So I don't have one to replace it with, but I did find this in a hardware store. Now if we pop it on, you can see that the hole is too big, so you know, might render it useless, but there is a trick. Look at this, a washer. Okay, put the washer on there, then we put the thingamajig over there, and we can see that they butt up nicely. And to hold it in place, we're going to do something we haven't done in the course of this restoration yet: silver solder. Now before we begin our soldering process, we've got to make sure all our components are spotlessly clean. Going to get some sandpaper and scrub back our copper pickup tube for our fuel. And then we're going to put our washer into the wire brush and be very careful not to lose it. See, this is how I know it's possible to travel in the time-space continuum, because bloody nuts, bolts, screws and washers do it all the time. Have our tools of the trade right here. We have our safety silv soldering wire. We have our stay silv flux. It's been on the shelf just a little too long. It's a bit crusty. We have a knife. We have a solderer cutter. We have some extra paraphernalia like a paintbrush and a pick and some tweezers. And then we have our fire torch. Hey, look at that, the yellow bottle. That's high octane stuff. Now, I'm not sure what an octane is. I'm not really sure if there's any octanes in it, but I'm sure if there was, there'd be a lot of them. That dog's got a very vivid imagination, you know. There's what's actually out there and what it's thinking it's seeing. Oh, there we go. This stuff looks a little bit like a slinky. Okay, just leave the work or it won't, eh? Well, I'm not overly convinced I've done a good job here. I mean, it's stuck. Oh. There you go, little hose clamp. Easier, simpler. Okay, we have a power bank, a fuse box. We have our little dash thing with the gauges in it. And we have our sender. We're going to see what life we can breathe into it, if any. All right, now we look on the back. And I'm not sure what this little box is, but it looks like it's supplying power to the gauges with this white wire that runs into the harness. So I'm going to swap that out with power from the fuse box right there. That middle green wire travels down to the back of the fuel gauge, so I'm going to leave him in place. It's the other one at top here that runs off to the harness that I suspect is going out to the sender. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plug in our sender to that clip. Rightio. Down here, I suspect that is a ground. So we're going to hook that up to our fuse box. And the last ground we have is, I don't know, but maybe the fuel tank is grounded and needs to be. So just for the sake of that, I can't see it doing any harm. I'm going to hold that onto the sender. All right. Be a dashboard like that so we can see what's going on. And then I'm going to hook up our fuse box. Hopefully nothing explodes. All right, and we look at the gauge, it's reading empty, and as we go full, oh, it's working. Look at that. It's going in. That's what it's doing. It's going in. is going to cause some befuddlement to the average viewer, wondering why we're installing the fuel tank on the wrong side of the vehicle. Well, we're not. What we are doing is installing this outrigger. That'll give us the option of a second fuel tank if we choose to have one further down the line. With a lot of jiggling and jostling, we've got the fuel tank where we need it to be. Now, it doesn't line up perfectly, but since when was that a priority with these old Land Rovers? Now, this section of the outrigger here is 1/2 inch wider on the other side where the fuel tank normally lives. The bolts that hold the fuel tank on are a 5/16, I believe. So if we put the head there, we can see that we do have space, provided we get the holes right in the middle. The holes that are on the fuel tank, elongated, are quite generous in how much space they give you. So I think we're good to go there. And we seem to be lined up at the front. We've got nice space around the outside. I think we can tack this guy on. Before we drop this tank, I want to get some base measurements and points of where our rear holes are going to be. That looks good. It's better than the other ones. This is what a weld's supposed to look like, and that's mine there. So I don't think we're going to get any prizes for presentation. However, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, and that's what we wanted to achieve. Here we are with the fuel tank all installed. Happy with it. It fits. Now, there is a price to have a second fuel tank, and it's not just the cost of the tank, which is quite a bit. Under the passenger seat is a little cubby box for tools and so forth. That has to go if you install one of these, because basically your backside's right here. So a second fuel tank would be good for expeditions. So we'll have to assess whether or not we have the courage to take this vehicle on an expedition, whether we're going to install a second tank. However, we are ready to roll. Now, when I took this fuel tank off, it was just bolted to the chassis metal to metal, and I'm not sure if that's how it's meant to be, or if there's meant to be some sort of little rubber buffers like you have with the radiator, just to sort of separate it from the vibration of the vehicle. Anyway, I intend, with these little rubber washers, to double them up and place them between the tank and the chassis. Now, if the tank does need to be earthed, I would expect that the bolts that connect them together would still be able to handle that for me. Anyway, we're going to try them out rather than just go steel to steel. So getting all those little bits and pieces back on the truck's quite the morale boost. It provides that little glimmer of light at the end of a very long and intimidating tunnel. It makes sense at this point in time that we move on to the engine, but we're not. There's been a lot of behind the scenes negotiations that have gone on for quite some time that are yet to be resolved. In short, the V8's not my first choice, and I'm looking into other options. In the meantime, however, we have some rather large and serious jobs that need to be addressed, and I fear it's going to end up being a mini-series within a series. So grab yourself a box of aspirin and a bucket of whiskey and prepare yourselves as we tackle bulkhead aches and other miseries. I mean, honestly. I mean, honestly.